next question for you is going to be about the Rhone varietals that you've brought in. You've got so many different Rhone varieties, and I know that you're on a pace to bring in all the ones from Chateauneuf du Pape and maybe a few others. I saw that you just did bottling on 2. Tell us about those and tell us what's in store for that and what others you'll be bringing in.
So when we started, we brought in what we thought were going to be the important Rhone varieties. So that meant Mourvedre, Syrah, Grenache, Counoise, Roussanne, Marsanne, Viognier, Grenache Blanc. And then a few years later, we brought in Picpoul. And then in 2003, we decided, we should bring in all of them. We've been surprised by some of the ones that have done really well here. And in many cases, this is going to be the first new plantings of some of these grapes anywhere in the world in decades. And so if nothing else, it's a really fun experiment for us. So we brought in those cuttings in 2003, and they've been in quarantine up at UC Davis ever since. And because these were all field cuttings, they all had viruses. And so Davis has to go through and clean them up before they can release them. And depending on how successful each round of cleanup is, they get released after 3 years, 6 years, 9 years, 12 years. So we have 2 of them in the ground and in production, and that's the Clairette Blanche and the Terret Noir that you were talking about. We've actually made now 2013 and 2014 2 vintages of those. We have one other, Picardan, that's in the ground, and we'll hopefully get a little crop off of this year. And then we have 3 more, Vaccarese and Cinsaut and Bourboulenc, that are out of quarantine and are being reproduced up at our nursery. And so we'll hopefully get those in the ground this coming winter. And then there's one more, poor Muscardin, that's still in quarantine that the next chance of getting it out will be next year. So the idea is not that we think any of these are necessarily going to be the next great grape, but we're planting half an acre of each, and we're vinifying them separately, and we're going to find out. And I know with the Picardan that we planted half an acre, and that increased the world's population of Picardan by 50%. So it's one of the things that we're fascinated by, and we figure that there are enough people who have followed us down this particular rabbit hole that if we're really fascinated by it, probably other people are going to be interested too.
Yep, I'll jump on that bandwagon. So congratulations on the new Adelaida AVA up here.
Thanks.
So how does, with all of the new AVAs, since there's 7, 9?
11.
11, oh my goodness. How does that set you apart now from the other AVAs? What does that say? What does it say really about the AVA here?
I think it's really early to decide what the impact is going to be of these AVAs. I mean, Paso was the single largest unsubdivided AVA in California, and I mean, it stretched 40 miles east to west and 30 miles north to south. It was just massive. And there's huge and real differences between the different parts of the appellation. There's differences in elevation between 650 feet and 2,700 feet. There's differences in rainfall from 6 inches to 35 inches. There can be 15 or 20 degree differences between where you are in the hot spots and in the cool mountain passes. So I'm sure that there will be differences that will become clear over time. But for us, the impact in the short term is basically that we're going to be able to distinguish our estate wines from the Patelin wines that we source from multiple places. So our estate wines will all say Adelaida District Paso Robles, and then the Patelin wines will just say Paso Robles. We'll find out over the next 5, 10, 20 years what the different appellations bring, because they certainly will bring something. But this is the beginning of a process, not the culmination.
Gotcha. Question for you that I've always been curious about here. I know that you guys do indigenous yeast for all your fermentations, and I know that with doing fermentations that way comes the risk of having a stuck fermentation. Have you guys ever had a stuck fermentation here, and how did you deal with it?
So, yeah, I mean, you have to be more hands-on when you're fermenting with native yeast. I mean, people talk about that as hands-off winemaking, and I think
it's really not. Yeah.
I think it's more fingerprints off winemaking. You actually have to be measuring things more actively than you would if you were just going to dump in a bunch of a cultured yeast, because you can be pretty confident it's going to do what you expect it to do. We have to be testing every tank, every barrel that's fermenting at least every day or two to know whether it's proceeding as we hope it will. And if there are lots that aren't doing what we expect them to do, then we're going to intervene. We're going to either mix them with a lot that's fermenting great, or we're going to pump them over the lees of something which is fermenting well, or if we need to, we can build up a culture from a tank that's fermenting well and then release it into a tank that hasn't been fermenting as well. So we don't have stuck fermentations, not because we don't have fermentations that would have stuck if we weren't paying attention, but just because we know that we have to be on it.
Sure. The barrel room. I mean, I know a lot about it, but can you tell us a little bit more about why that's so unique? I mean, the other people aren't using the foeders and other things.
So when you're figuring out how to age the wines you want to age, you're basically trying to decide how much oxygen do I want to give them and how much oak do I want to give them. And what we've decided, and this is something that comes directly from our experience at Beaucastel, is that we want sort of very minor but consistent oxygen, and we want very little oak. And so if you figure out how you do both of those things, we use large wood. I mean, you can compare a 60-gallon barrel, a normal wine barrel, where you have 60 gallons inside it and you have the surface area of a regular barrel. You compare that to a 1,200-gallon foudre, where you have 20 times the volume of wine and something like 4 times the surface area. So you have a lot more volume compared to the surface area. And so the impact of the oak is gentler. You also have thicker staves in those big barrels, so the penetration of oxygen through the staves is slower. So you can protect grapes like Grenache that are prone to oxidation from getting oxidized, but at the same time keep grapes like Syrah and Mourvedre that are prone to reduction from going funky because they're in an anaerobic environment. So you have kind of this balance between allowing something to age gently and still allowing it to progress.
Perfect.